welcome back. If you watched all the videos, you are now listening to me for almost 3 hours. It is about time to puzzle all the parts we talked about together. This video is a wrap-up of the entire scheme that we have been discussing since the beginning of chapter 2. So, let's go. First of all, knowing stage 1 of your team, of your area of activity, that is the underlying of everything. As a leader, it is not your first job to constantly bring new clients, to constantly have new ideas or new visions of the future. That would be business romance. Your job as a leader is, first of all, to ensure that you are capable of action. And in first approach, going concern is more important than growth. And therefore, the focus of the leader is at first on the present situation. And I gave you key factors like people, time, cash, assets, risk, and emotions to map the current situation. That does not mean that additional information not fitting into one of those categories is irrelevant. Believing that, you couldn't be far from the truth. I want again to illustrate the idea shortly. You have your dimensions, people, time, cash, and assets, as you can see. And in daily business, these dimensions consume resources. The consumption is represented by those boxes showing up here. In addition, you put up a reserve for risk and emotions. Risk and emotions might be positive, and yes, there is positive risk, and emotions will more often support you than you recognize, but also might cause additional resource consumption. The reserve I want to take for that is represented by the second layer of boxes showing up now. Of course, resources are limited. To simplify it, I put one red line that represents the budget restriction for people, time, cash, and assets. And as we see, we are below the line with stage 1, so we are fine. We still have reserves. This is your first duty as a leader, to know what is going on in your area and to ensure that you have enough reserves to continue daily operation. It all looks fine here. Now, let us go back. The initial impulse for the leadership scheme is an intention. Your own or given to you from your boss. Use the words "I want" to mark an intention you want to turn to reality. And really, I encourage you to sit in a meeting and say, for example, "I want to have a plan how to onboard this new employee." I know it's difficult for some of us to say "I want." Please exercise that one. After you communicate that intention, just check and be open to see other intentions around you. Allow yourself to be mindful of other intentions. Do not apply ideological point of views to people's behavior. Don't plan on the basis of how people should be. It is simply a sign of being unprofessional. Be professional and just map intentions around you, as good as you can, of course. And as a leader, you're allowed to do that. You are allowed to model people's behavior. Just remember, there is a chance you might be wrong. And as a leader, you know that every new intention is embedded into your current reality, and therefore you update quick stage 1. And again, you do this update to check if there are resources available to realize your intention. Having done that, you look at the intention. You do assess the intention and ask what is the own core performance you have to deliver with your team. Probably you remember that we talked in this context also about the definition of done. Recall that. After you have done that, you check if it does make sense to break the intention down into smaller steps. Even if it is not possible to break it down into smaller steps, Try that. It is a kind of a trigger for your creativity. It is a trick to get your brain focused on the issue. And then third, very important, check for terms and restriction limiting your freedom of action. Having done that, you start with assessing stage one. What kind of information is relevant and what does it mean in correspondence to your intention? And when you're finished with that, you created awareness for your situation. And after that, you start planning. You do develop alternatives and think about stage 2 and stage 3. Think about pros and cons, check if the alternative fits into your budget concerning people, time, cash and assets, and think about risk and emotion again. And it is not unlikely that you have to work on stage 1 a bit to get additional resources for stage 2. Again, stage 2 comes on the top of stage 1. And of course, stage 2 also has risk. And if you break the budget line, there's something you have to do about it. Change stage 1. Postpone certain items in stage 1 or 2, or worst case, you have to skip that alternative of realization. In an ideal world, see it here, stage 3 realizes when stage 2 is completely done. That is not always the case. Well, going back to the scheme, after developing and evaluating alternatives for realization, you decide which alternatives you choose, and of course you have to explain, probably just yourself, why you chose that alternative. Please document the underlying thoughts of your decision, because if the underlying changes, you can change your decision. And after having chosen an alternative, you formulate a resolution. And that is the leadership scheme. It is simple for sure. But if you hold on to that scheme as a manager, nobody can ask for more so far. And of course, it's not about knowing it. You have to train it, you have to exercise it, and then it becomes a skill. And for sure, a useful skill. Well, that's it so far. Thank you so much. Coming up next, in chapter 5, we will look at a well-known communication scheme for execution. Next chapter is about how to turn your resolution into reality, how to execute what you have planned. See you then.